Greetings, everyone. You are witnessing historic moments unfolding, from secret bunkers in Tehran to massive steel graveyards in Siberia. The fabric of the world is being torn apart. An open civil war is raging within the Islamic leadership. Why did Speaker of the Parliament Ghalibaf have to go on television to admit weakness before the United States? And the biggest mystery right now, where is Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei after more than 45 days of complete silence? Is some shadowy figure now running Tehran? Next, the U.S. Navy launches a suffocating blockade operation. The truth behind the capture of the Tuskar ship and the battle of wits between modern underwater robots and the IRGC's minefields in the Strait of Hormuz. When diplomacy fails, is gunfire the only option left? And the last legacy of the Soviet Union has vanished into thin air. Shocking satellite images reveal the harsh truth about the Russian military. The stockpiles of tens of thousands of tanks that once terrified NATO are now just empty lots. How will Russia continue the war in Ukraine when it has to resort to using motorcycles instead of armored divisions? Where has Iran's supreme leader gone? Civil war erupts in Tehran. A wave of skepticism is sweeping across all of Iran, signaling an unstoppable political storm. This country is witnessing a fierce power struggle between two opposing factions to gain control over the nation's destiny. One side is striving to find a way out through negotiations with the United States, while the other side is determined to prevent that at all costs. The long-standing hatred between these two forces is now out in the open, spilling onto the streets before the shocked Iranian people. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi lead the faction promoting diplomacy with the United States. Their main opposition is none other than the powerful Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Tensions reached a peak when a social media account closely linked to Saeed Jalili, a hardline conservative, Ghalibaf's longtime rival and a member of the National Security Council, publicly attacked the negotiation faction. The post included the hashtag coup plotters, which sent shockwaves through Iranian politics. The content of the post was highly provocative, calling on Mojtaba Khamenei, a highly influential figure today, to publicly clarify his stance on whether to support negotiations. It also warned that any official acting without the supreme leader's approval would be considered a traitor to the nation. The most shocking part was that this account was suddenly deactivated right after the strong message was posted. This mysterious disappearance raises a big question. Is a bloody internal conflict quietly raging, more intense than we imagine? This is not an isolated incident, but one of many examples showing that the wave of opposition to the negotiation faction is spreading rapidly like an oil slick.
Trong hàng ngũ, những kẻ nắm giữ quyền lực.
Strong voices have risen, asserting that diplomacy only brings loss to the country and calling on the Revolutionary Guards to intervene militarily immediately to stop what is considered the betrayal of the nation by Ghalibaf and his associates. For the first time since the conflict began, the world is seeing Tehran's two factions openly fight each other to this degree. Previously, under the pressure of war, the people of Iran seem to have temporarily set aside their differences to unite. Even those who used to protest regularly didn't dare to take to the streets because of the fear of bombings. But now, in the suffocating atmosphere of the ceasefire, the deep rifts within the supreme leadership of the Islamic regime have become clearly visible in broad daylight. In this critical situation, Speaker of the Parliament Ghalibaf had to appear on national television to explain to the public the urgent need for diplomacy. Although he affirmed that Iran is making progress on the battlefield, he still had to bitterly admit a harsh reality, that the United States is a far superior military power. He recalled that Iran had shot down nearly 200 drones and even an F-35 fighter jet. These achievements resulted from impressive technological advances in under a year, not luck. However, he also frankly warned the people not to be under the illusion that the enemy has been completely eliminated, as the opponent still possesses overwhelming financial resources and weaponry. In that dramatic interview, Ghalibaf emphasized that Iran would not make any concessions that go against the will of the supreme leader. He rejected the claims of surrender made by Donald Trump and affirmed that negotiations are essentially just another form of combat on a battlefield without gunfire. He likened diplomacy to a parallel front supporting the military, where leaders must fight tenaciously to protect national interests. He says the people fight in the streets, the military fights on the front lines, and he fights like a soldier at the negotiating table to secure the hard-won achievements paid for by the people's sacrifices. Tension rose as the opposition insisted the supreme leader make a final decision. However, Ali Khamenei remained completely silent. Over 45 days have passed, and the claim that he is receiving medical treatment is now less believable than ever. Rumors that he was seriously injured or even had passed away began to spread, making behind-the-scenes politics in Tehran even more chaotic and tense. In closed meetings with his advisors, Ghalibaf did not hesitate to criticize his opponents as extremists with militia mindsets who would bring the country down. He accused Sayyid Jalili's faction of using state television to incite public opinion in order to overthrow him and Minister Arachi from their current positions during this critical time. This tension had been brewing since Minister Arachi stated the Strait of Hormuz was open for trade, a claim the IRGC quickly and strongly refuted. The Revolutionary Guard Navy even broadcast messages across the Gulf insulting Iraqi as a fool, asserting that this strategic strait would never be opened at the will of any individual. Nevertheless, amid all the hatred and deep divisions, negotiations are still hanging by a thread. Although diplomatic processes are facing major obstacles causing delays, the flame of hope has not been completely extinguished. Before delving into those developments, we need to pay special attention to the incident in which an Iranian cargo ship was just forcibly seized by U.S. forces under highly suspicious circumstances. According to reputable sources from Reuters, the ship named Tuskar, flying the Iranian flag, was seized this past Sunday and was found to be transporting dual-use goods, equipment that can easily be converted for military purposes to serve the Iranian military. To understand the seriousness of the situation, we need to look back at the records from 2019 when the Tuskar ship was first placed on the U.S. sanctions list. The reason at that time was very clear. It was suspected of being a crucial link in transporting components for Tehran's ballistic missile program. Therefore, there is every reason to believe that on this journey, the Tuskar is once again carrying similar equipment. Two scenarios are considered. Iran may be using the ceasefire to stockpile weapons in case talks fail, or the IRGC itself is deliberately transporting contraband to provoke conflict and completely sabotage the diplomatic efforts of the moderate faction. Currently, with the ship now under the control of the U.S. military, concrete evidence about its secret cargo hold will soon be made public to the world in the coming days. In a related development, the United States Central Command CENTCOM has just issued a forceful update on the maritime blockade situation as of this morning. The U.S. military has forced and compelled 27 ships to turn back or return to Iranian ports since the blockade operation began. Messages broadcast from U.S. warship 175 echoed across the sea like an ultimatum. You are entering a military blockade zone. The blockade order on Iranian ports is being strictly enforced on all vessels, regardless of their national flag. Any vessel entering or leaving the port will be stopped for inspection under international law. If you deliberately break the blockade, we will use force to enforce it. Alongside the suffocating blockade on the surface, another silent and intense battle is taking place beneath the ocean. The United States military is currently deploying a force of robots and advanced drones to sweep and destroy the minefields that the IRGC has laid in the Strait of Hormuz. First is the unmanned surface vehicle from ITX, which tows the AQS-20 sonar system to sweep the seabed in narrow lanes. Next are the battery-powered underwater killers, like the Kingfish Mk1 1812 or the Knifefish from General Dynamics. They are deployed from small boats to hunt down even the most stubborn mines. When a target is detected, a second group of robots will approach to detonate or destroy them remotely, clearing safe lanes for ships to pass through. However, the threat doesn't just come from silent mines. The IRGC is always lurking with suicide drones like the UAV Sahat, or even teams of Marines on speedboats armed with AK-47S ready to attack oil tankers, as we've seen recently. That's why, if a long-term peace agreement isn't signed soon, the vital shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz will hardly return to normal. Even so, the fact that the U.S. is proactively clearing mines shows that they're staying one step ahead to prepare for the possibility of a successful agreement. Looking at the negotiation table in Islamabad, Pakistan, the situation is becoming extremely tense and full of uncertainty. A delegation from Iran, led by Speaker of the Parliament Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, is expected to fly here on Tuesday to begin make-or-break negotiations. Mr. Ghalibaf has taken a firm stance, saying he will only join if the U.S. sends Vice President Jidvan. Reports from Washington indicate that Mr. Jidvan is also preparing to depart for this important trip. By the time Mr. Vance arrives, the ceasefire may have already expired. If the ceasefire is not immediately extended, an atmosphere of chaos will engulf the negotiating table, as gunfire could erupt again, just as politicians are trying to find common ground. The continuous delays since last week have pushed the meeting into a precarious situation. Unbelievable. New satellite images reveal shocking truths about the Russian military. While the Middle East is boiling on another battlefield, the latest satellite images of the Russian military have revealed a shocking truth. The data shows that Moscow's armored losses are irreversible and far more serious than anything we have ever imagined. The massive stockpile of tanks and armored vehicles that the Soviet Union painstakingly accumulated over decades in preparation for a major war with NATO has now almost vanished into thin air. Ukraine has succeeded in crushing this strategic reserve at a terrifying pace, exposing the exhaustion of a system once thought to be unbeatable. Now Russia can no longer rely on those endless stockpiles. They are having to scrape together the last remaining scraps at the bottom of the warehouse to sustain the war. The glory of the Soviet armored forces is fading faster than ever under the heat of the modern battlefield. Satellite images captured before the flames of war erupted in Ukraine once revealed a massive military legacy, a steel ghost from the Soviet era still looming with authority. Stretching across dozens of storage bases, from the European part of Russia to the remote lands of Siberia, thousands of tanks stood in endless, long rows. Those were war machines, T-72s, T-80s, T-62s, and even older variants standing alongside tens of thousands of combat vehicles, infantry vehicles, and armored personnel carriers. Reports estimate that the number of tanks in storage alone range from 7,000 to 10,000, a part of the Soviet Union's massive arsenal, which once exceeded 50,000 armored vehicles. These tank depots were not simply storage sites. They were the backbone of the military mobilization doctrine. At that time, they were designed to equip all reserve armies in the event of a full-scale war with the West. For decades, they symbolized the ability to sustain combat operations on a scale that no other country could hope to match. However, the latest satellite data now reveals the exact opposite, a much harsher reality. When the war in Ukraine has crushed this proud legacy in less than 4 short years. Just counting the losses confirmed through videos and actual images from independent analysts, the number has exceeded 4,000 tanks and more than 13,000 armored vehicles of all kinds. And in reality, this number is certainly much higher. The key storage bases that used to be filled with this equipment have become astonishingly empty, with only bare vehicle frames or scattered, rusted steel wrecks remaining. In-depth analyses show that out of the original stockpile, only about 2,400 vehicles remain, but the key point is that only a small portion of them are still operational or even valuable enough to be dismantled for spare parts. At some strategic locations, the number of usable vehicles is less than 100. The rest have either been destroyed, stripped of parts to patch up other units, or have simply deteriorated severely after decades of being abandoned to the ravages of time. This depletion of armored resources has dealt a direct and devastating blow to Russia's military campaign in Ukraine, forcing Moscow to make a survival-driven change in its troop deployment tactics. Instead of large-scale maneuver operations with strong support from tanks and mechanized units, Russian forces now increasingly have to rely on infantry-focused attacks. They are forced to use light vehicles, even motorcycles, to support small assault groups of only 2 to 3 soldiers carrying out infiltration efforts. These tactics are not only slow and vulnerable to defensive fire, but also cause terrible losses of life. Without the protection of armored steel and strong supporting firepower, Russian units find it very difficult to make decisive breakthroughs. Even when they capture a piece of territory at the cost of massive casualties, they still lack the mobility to exploit and expand on that achievement. The inevitable result is that the pace of the war has completely changed. The lightning attacks with overwhelming firepower have now disappeared, replaced by a painful war of attrition. In this context, the progress of the war is now measured in meters of land instead of dozens of kilometers, where the price paid for small gains is extremely costly. These consequences are not limited to the battlefield, but have also expanded into a strategic crisis for Russia. The prolonged war has turned Moscow's greatest and final military advantage into an existential burden. What satellite images reveal is a tragic forced transformation. Russia has traded away 50 years of painstaking preparation and irreplaceable strategic reserves inherited from the Soviet era for minimal territorial gains. Their ability to regenerate large-scale combat power has been fundamentally shaken, marking a historic turning point that could determine the ultimate outcome of this entire war. Based on the discussion above, Do you think any agreement is possible without Iran's supreme leader? And is Russia currently much weaker now?